Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Andrew DiStefano, Putnam County Crime Analysis. Taking a break from Bonadeo right now because I saw something come up on the TV 2 nights ago, and I thought it was pretty interesting, which may or may not apply to Putnam County, but you may see it in Putnam County in the very near future, depending upon how law enforcement chooses to go. And essentially what I'm talking about is the 287G program. 287G is a section of the Immigration Nationality Act of 1996 that was pushed by President Clinton at the time. And essentially it allowed DHS to deputize local law enforcement and certain people within local law enforcement agencies to conduct immigration enforcement within their county. If you wanted to participate in that program, there were several programs within Section 287G, you had to undergo certain types of training. Just a reset on Putnam. Many years ago, probably 15 years ago or so, 287G was like all the rage. It was talked about by a lot of local elected officials, people that were trying to get votes but didn't plan on doing anything about it. We're going to get 287G. We're going to, they kept talking about illegal immigration, illegal immigrants, etc. Nothing was ever done about it. And 287G was never pursued. And all these years later, probably almost 2 decades now, Putnam County is still not enrolled in the federal 287G program. So what is 287G? How does it work? Essentially, as I said, it allows DHS to enter MOAs, memorandums of agreement, with local law enforcement agencies so that certain selected people within that agency can conduct immigration enforcement. As of last month, ICE had 287G agreements with 135 agencies across 21 states. In New York State, up until about a month and a half ago, New York State had agreements, 287G agreements. In New York State, there's 62 counties. They had agreements with one county, one sheriff's department, the Rensselaer County Sheriff's Department. So one county out of 62 had enrolled in 287G. And it was only in one program. As I said, in the 287G, there are 3 programs, and I'm going to get into it in a minute. Rensselaer County is enrolled in one program within the 287G. So what type of 287G agreements exist? There used to be 4, okay? Then it whittled down to 3. And essentially, there's the jail enforcement model, the warrant services officer model, the task force model. Now, the task force model was done away with sometime around 2012 because there was a whole slew of pattern and practice, civil rights abuses, civil rights lawsuits. Some guys got arrested. I believe there was criminal charges, massive lawsuits. The feds came in and basically, took over police departments because they weren't supervising it. They weren't committed to it. They thought it was a cool thing to say during an election, and they weren't committed. They weren't serious about what it takes to actually participate in this program and make sure it's done right. So what types of 287G agreements exist? Well, the first one, you have the jail enforcement model. That's where deputized officers may interrogate non-citizens who've been arrested on local charges to determine status. That's important, I think, because right now you can't do that. They may issue immigration detainers where an administrative request is made from ICE to law enforcement to hold a non-citizen for up to 48 hours. So essentially, the law enforcement agent in the law enforcement, say investigator or detective in that department, that police department or sheriff's department, they become essentially ICE, and they issue the detainer request to hold that person for up to 48 hours. They become ICE's almost their representative in that department. As of December of 2024, that's when these numbers are last calculated to. ICE had 287G agreements, jail enforcement memorandum agreements with 60 agencies across 16 states. Now, the second agreement there is the warrant service officer model. And that's where ICE trains, certifies, and authorizes selected state and local law enforcement agencies to execute ICE administrative warrants. They're permitted to perform arrest functions within a jail. All right. Now, the difference between the JEM, the jail enforcement model, and the warrant service officer model, in the warrant services officer model, ICE does not authorize local law enforcement officers to interrogate alleged non-citizens about their immigration status. Now, the training. Jail enforcement model, any deputized officer must complete a 4-week program at FLETC. FLETC is in, that's the ICE Academy in Charleston, South Carolina. Many years ago, it was done in Glencoe, Georgia, where the Secret Service trains. But now it is done at FLETC in South Carolina. And they're taught basically 3 blocks of instruction: immigration law, how to use ICE databases, and multicultural communications and racial profiling, which is important. We'll get into that in a second. So that's a 4-week training. There's less training for those in the warrant service officer model. It requires only an 8-hour block of instruction, and it's one day. And the ICE agent comes to the department, or they go to local ICE office and they're trained. Now, there have been major improvements in this program. I first wrote this up probably about a week ago, and ICE Director Tom Homan foresaw all the problems that 287G had, because 287G over the years has caused probably more problems than they've solved. So what they did was to tighten up this program. They've instituted the following 3 bullets. They require 287G officers to maintain comprehensive alien arrest, detention, and removal data in order to ensure enforcement efforts remain focused on criminal aliens, particularly those who pose the greatest risk to public safety. That's important. Second one is they strengthened the 287G basic training course, and they created new refresher training courses. Very critical, because before, what ICE was doing was they were signing up these police departments and sheriff's departments, and that was it. They were just signing them up and then qualifying them, certifying them, and then leaving them to their own devices. And that's how all these problems occurred. There was no supervision at all by ICE, none. And that's typical feds. Typical feds. They've deployed additional supervisors to the field, and they've established an internal advisory committee, which includes a whole bunch of different like internal affairs type of operations to make sure that things are being done right. They've also revised the 287G memorandums of agreement. There's just a whole bunch of training requirements here. I'm not going to go through them. It is kind of interesting. It shows the participating agencies here. Now, Florida, you can see, is really knocking the cover off the ball. They're really going after it. They're signing people up left and right in Florida. Now, New York, as I said, New York initially had the Rensselaer County Sheriff's Department, which had the jail enforcement model. Now you still have the Rensselaer County Sheriff's Office, and you also have now the Broome County Sheriff's Office. And what's interesting is here you have the Nassau County Police Department and the Nassau County Sheriff's Office. They've essentially they've embedded ICE into their department. Nassau County is having a lot of problems, and it's just, I find it funny because Nassau County was named the safest county in America, from that silly article that came out a few months ago. Goes to show how silly it was. But Nassau County is having a lot of problems with MS-13, with Tren de Aragua specifically. It's no coincidence that when a couple of weeks ago, Nassau, I believe it was Nassau. I don't think it was Suffolk. I believe it was Nassau. Correct me if I'm wrong. That was up in Putnam County looking for a murder suspect that was hiding in the village of Brewster. And that's been a fear of mine. I've made several Tren de Aragua videos a few months back, and that's been a fear of mine. These guys committing crimes and hiding in the village of Brewster, pretending to be Guatemalan, and they're not, but they blend in, and we're not going to know the difference. I'm not saying that this guy was Tren de Aragua. I don't know anything about him. I think that information should have been put out. If you're gonna put out a release saying, "Oh yeah, the murder suspect was hiding in the village of Brewster," you should probably tell us what's going on with it. But I digress. Now the program costs. That's what you always need to know. And before I go on this, let me just look at the. This was the participating agencies. This is the pending agencies. And as you can see, it doesn't appear that in New York State there are any pending police departments, because I looked for Putnam. It could be any police department. It could be the Carmel PD or the Brewster PD, Cold Spring. It could be the Sheriff's Department. State police obviously would be, they're on the state level. With Governor Hochul, I don't think we'll be participating in 287G anytime soon. But these are the pending agencies in New York State. And as you see, there's nothing from Putnam. So the program cost. ICE will cover the cost of the training in FLETC, which is the 4-week training down in South Carolina. They cover the travel, the food, et cetera. ICE comes to the police department or sheriff's department. They will install the computers. They'll install the databases. They'll have whatever equipment their people will need to operate the 280 and to utilize the 287G program. Local law enforcement is responsible for all personnel costs, salaries, benefits, overtime, etc. So, in other words, you send 3 or 4 investigators to the 287G training down in FLETC in South Carolina, and you're still paying that. You, meaning the sheriff's department or the police department, you're still paying for that officer. He's still on your pay. He or she is still on your payroll. You're paying all his benefits, all his salary, etc. The feds do not reimburse for that. They don't cover the cost of that. So, as a boss, as a chief of police, as a sheriff, etc., only you will know how many people you can lose at one time. How many people can you afford to send to training? And I don't mean afford in a financial sense, but afford in an operational sense. How many people can you lose and still maintain operations? Now, the best of my research comes up with some costs of detention may be reimbursed. I got a lot of problems with that statement. I don't know what that means. Okay, so initially, how were jurisdictions chosen for since 1996 up until President Trump taking office, up until Tom Homan coming into his position? How were jurisdictions chosen? Essentially, all the local law enforcement agency did was send an email and then wait on it. And essentially, what was happening was all these departments would just send emails. They would wait their turn. They'd get approved. They would get their training, and that was it. And ICE just left them out there to their own devices. There was no follow up with them. There was no due diligence being done on these departments. And a lot of them, particularly out west in Arizona, a lot of them wound up in some serious trouble, like some serious legal problems, to the point where in 2021, the GAO, the General Accounting Office, which is the government's bean counters, and what's the guy's name? I forgot his name. He's essentially the Inspector General, Mike Horowitz. Horowitz did an investigation on this program, on the 287G program, and he found a lot of problems. And that was just in 2021. Essentially, there was a failure to establish clearly defined goals in a police department. That's critical. I've said the same thing in Bonadeo. You have to establish clearly defined goals, and when you don't have them, you're asking for trouble. Several jurisdictions became subjects of DOJ civil rights investigations after engaging in pattern practice racial profiling. Now it's somewhat different. They send the email, they reach out, but these are the letters of interest that they have to send in, and it's a different letter for each program that you want to sign up for. whether it's the jail enforcement model, the warrant service officer model, the task force model. But essentially, this is what you're doing, is submitting a letter like this. And then what will happen is they'll do the due diligence on your department, and then they'll try to figure out using data, can they use you? Can they become working with a particular agency in a particular area? Can they become a force multiplier? Is it worth it for the feds? Before they weren't doing that. Before they were just signing up as many people as they could and checking off the box, and then bragging about it at funding time, almost like politicians do. Now, my concerns for Putnam, and I have to be honest, most of these concerns have been addressed by this new memorandum that Tom Homan put out, and it's right here. My concerns for Putnam is essentially when you think of this program, say 287G and immigration enforcement in Putnam County, where in Putnam do you think about immediately? The village of Brewster, right? That's a problem. That's a problem from a legal standpoint, because you already are expressing your inherent bias. Why the village of Brewster? Because especially if you're talking about targeting people that have committed serious crimes, not people whose only crime is their status of immigration. So you shouldn't be going into an investigation with a preconceived notion. All right. But it appears that those problems, those concerns, have already been addressed by Homan's office. Not gonna go through it, but and that leads me or segues into my next concern. What would they be picked up for? And Tom Homan's office goes into that also. He essentially tells you, look, you're here not to enforce immigration status. We're here to go after the bad guys. We're here to go after guys who have serious criminal records and immigration problems. That's who we're looking at. If they have criminal records, serious crimes, serial criminal background, and they have illegal status, then they are apt to be removed from the country. That's someone that they should be targeting, and that's what ICE, the current ICE, puts out in their memorandum. All right, it's tough enough. The fact that another concern that I have, and this can't be addressed by Tom Homan or anyone else, it can only be addressed locally, and that is if you're going to be enrolling in this program, and I think it's a good program. You're asking your people to look at some immigration issues, and if they do, then they need to know the whole gamut. They need to know about Tren de Aragua. They need to know about Tren de Aragua's green light that they have on American law enforcement officers. Shoot to kill any law enforcement officer in America for any reason or no reason. Remember that? That was in the video that I made. That thing was put out. That green light was put out in the summer. And since that green light was issued, 3 New York City police officers were shot. And they based it on that green light. And yet when I've talked to guys locally, a lot of people have never heard of Tren de Aragua, and they didn't know about this, this green light. So if you're going to be asking your people to engage in immigration type enforcement, then you need to let them know what's going on a whole scale, not just being able to debrief people. They need to know that there's a green light out there. They need to know about Tren de Aragua, how vicious they are, etc. Now, the task force model, that's the third piece in the 287G. Task force model was done away with years ago because of the pattern and practice lawsuits and the fact that a lot of police departments and sheriff's departments, they weren't committed to the supervision. They didn't have strong supervision at the top. And as such, they became subjects of very serious racial profiling lawsuits. They've now brought it back, but there are a lot of stipulations to the program. Essentially, can you become a force multiplier for the government? All right. Um, so this segues right into the Lincoln Riley Act. Now, what is the difference? There's a huge difference. But we also have nationwide, we have the Lincoln Riley Act. The Lincoln Riley Act it directs federal immigration enforcement, to detain and deport those without legal status, charged with minor theft, assault of a law enforcement officer, or crimes resulting in death or serious bodily injury of another person. Now, what word pops off the page at you right away when you read that or when you hear it? It's charged with, not convicted of, charged with. In addition, it also applies to people that make admissions to. So if your investigators debrief someone and the guy admits to being part of some boosting operation at the Danbury Mall, that's good enough to have him held and deported. So under the Lincoln Riley Act, a lot of critics say that there's a lack of due process here, and I guess there is, but it has survived court challenges thus far. The act itself is named after a young nursing student named Lincoln Riley, and Lincoln Riley was a student down in Georgia, and Jose Ibarra was the illegal, the non-citizen who came here illegally from Venezuela. He immediately was put up in the Roosevelt Hotel, the famous Roosevelt Hotel in New York City. He was charged with a couple of crimes, one of them being, endangering the welfare of a minor. He should have been prosecuted by DA Alvin Bragg's office. He wasn't. They dropped the charges, and then they found a not-for-profit, an NGO, through the USAID, by the way, to fund a plane ticket for him, with a plane ticket, money, and a cell phone for Jose Ibarra to go to Georgia. All on a taxpayer's dime, by the way. All on a taxpayer's dime. He goes down to Georgia. Right away, he starts committing crimes, and he murders and attempts to sexually assault Lincoln Riley. She fought back, and it cost her life. This act is named after her and her bravery. Now, when President Trump put this act together, it's clear he was thinking well beyond his term in office, because if you read it, he's talking a lot in here about the ability of state attorneys general to sue the feds if the feds aren't doing their job. So he's assuming that one day he's not going to be in office, and they're going to be playing the same games they played for the last 4 years. And this act gives them the ability to carry out the Lincoln Riley Act on a state level. And it amends the Immigration and Nationality Act to require the mandatory detention of undocumented immigrants. And it's very minor thefts that they were looking at, but it also accelerates to assaults upon police officers. So that's about it with 287G and the Lincoln Riley Act. I think that if it's done correctly, and if local law enforcement is committed to spending the time and the resources to oversee this, and there's no real resources. It's just there's only so much time in a day. So are you going to commit that time to this program and to programs like it? Are you committed to making sure that this program doesn't get way out ahead of you, and you wind up with pattern and practice civil rights lawsuits and such? Because that's how it got taken away from other police departments and sheriff's departments. And Tom Homan cuts no bones about it here. He says if we find out that you guys are engaged in racial profiling, you're going to wish you didn't. So it's in there. So you really need to be careful as to what you're going to do. But if you're a chief of police, if you're a sheriff, and you think that this is something that you can dedicate your time to, because it's going to take dedication from the top, then I think the 287G is a win-win. It's a tool in a toolbox. It's there for when you need it. You don't even have to ever use it, but it's there for when you need it. I think it's a win. But like I said, only the leader of a certain agency is going to know that, because especially for the initial training, only they're going to know what they can afford to give up for 4 weeks. Only they know what they can spare, operationally. So in any event, this has been Andrew DeStefano of Putnam County Crime Analysis. Glad to look into this, and we will talk soon. Thank you, and God bless as always.